But I'd love to start off with performances that you've seen as part of the presenting series that you feel like had a particularly large impact on you, or that were particularly meaningful or memorable. And just make sure you speak loud enough for the microphone to capture you.
Well, I'll start with this, because I want to know if you remember this. But the first performance that I saw at the dance center was Oscar Schlemmer's Bauhaus. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
And I thought, what the hell am I doing here? That was crazy, and I did not like it. Right?
Yeah, I remember.
What did you think?
I had only had jazz prior to coming here, and so it was a complete error that I found myself here. So I saw all sorts of crazy things before settling in.
Yep, so you may or may not know that Jackie and I were classmates. We graduated the same year.
What year was that,
It was
too?
1990.
1990.
Yeah, 1990.
90, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're the Uptown crew.
Classmates.
At Columbia College.
But with the Uptown crew.
Uptown,
The
yeah.
Uptown crew, that's where I first encountered the dance center. Was still at the Uptown.
What was the first thing you saw?
I don't know about the first thing, but I'm thinking about things that's, I mean, whenever I think of this, the first thing that I think of, and I think maybe it was, I think it was just when I was new to teaching at Columbia, so it was probably in the early 1990s. It was a Trisha Brown performance, and I had never seen her work, and I didn't have a really, I had been dancing with Hubbard Street, and then I had kids, right? So and I didn't have an academic dance learning experience.
Was it at the dance center, or was it at the Harold Washington Library?
No, it was at the dance center.
It was at the
And there were
dance center.
structures on the stage, and I kind of have a sense of it made an impression on me, like somehow the way the space was organized made an impression, and it stayed in my mind. And I don't know that it was like, important, pivotal, whatever, but there it still is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and did you perform in the old dance center?
Yep.
Yeah. So
Things that were novel in the old dance center is that the dressing room was off the lobby in the front of the building, so you had to walk through the house holding hands in the dark
Yeah,
to
right.
the stage, and then you had to step, there was a lip there, and then you'd go in the wing, right? And that was how we got backstage. And before that, there was a staircase that went up to the second floor, and before that, people would go up and down the staircase. And that also, at the top of the staircase, was the best place to sit in the theater to watch anything.
Yeah.
And hot, 120 degrees in the summertime.
Yeah.
It was a massive space too. It was so deep, and in the scale of house to performance space was really, really different than this one. So it was. I don't remember how many seats were in that house. It was.
I think it was 250.
Yeah. So but compared to the scale of the space,
And these
it
chairs
felt like
actually came from the old dance center.
Yeah. And I remember having when I was teaching there, my daughter, I would take my two daughters when I was divorced to performances there, and there were family, there were all kinds of different things, and I remember going to the performance and sitting there, and I realized that Lydia was no longer sitting next to me, and she was
Underneath the right.
underneath all the chairs, behind the legs of all of the audience members there. Yeah.
What did you teach here or there?
Yeah, so I had been, I had my dancing life with Hubbard Street for a decade, and then I had children, so I was in my kitchen with a toddler on the floor and a baby on my hip, and I got a phone call from Shirley Mordine, who said, "Hello, Ginger. I'd like to speak with you about your interest in teaching modern dance." And I was like, oh, I have not studied modern dance, but I have a modern mind, and I think that the way I was thinking about dance when I was younger was really very much had that orientation. So we had a conversation about it, and then I started teaching modern, intermediate modern, which certainly was not modern. It was some kind of morphing thing that was happening.
What year was that?
It would have been 1991.
Right, so it was after I graduated. But I remember you teaching in the space.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Did you have an interest in teaching modern when she taught you?
I had an interest in teaching, I had been teaching, and I was curious about how I might teach, because I felt constrained wherever I was. I felt like, I'm not really a jazz dancer, but this jazz that we're doing here, and I'm not really a ballet dancer, but I do it every day. And then, also, I'm not really a modern trained person, but I feel like I have a modern mind. So everywhere I was, I felt like I was a little bit like coming at it from. So I learned a lot about teaching. I learned different things about teaching than I had learned before.
Well, now I'm so curious. So when you started teaching modern, I
Yeah,
know.
what did I do?
You're like, what were you thinking about it? Exactly. Like, okay, I'm teaching modern, so I have to do blah.
Well, it was funny because it was a period. It was before Jan went through that extensive pedagogy,
Right. She just came on full time right after we graduated. So we just had like a little smattering of her as students, and then she was full on after that. So 1991 or so.
And so there was a thing that I had also been dancing in other people's works. Like I danced in a lot of Robin Lake's works during the period of time when my kids were little. I had done some set work and done some work with Akasha, and so I think I was just trying to kind of work out some things about what technique is and where does it lie and how does it relate to the thing you're actually going to do when you perform something in the space, and why does it matter if you do these movements in class and then you do this other thing when you're on stage. And I was just kind of navigating all of that and integrating some choreographic ideas from the people I had worked with, and also getting back to some things about the relationship between dance and music that I hadn't felt like was really addressed in my performing career exactly. So I'm sure it was a big mashup, and I still, I get bar.
It has a long history of being a big mashup.
It has a long history of being a big mashup.
I gave a pretty rigorous bar,
exactly.
and also we were working with students. Like at the time, there was no admissions. There was open admissions policy, so people were coming, and there wasn't really a way to differentiate between people and their abilities and their aspirations at the time. So people who had some really amazing lives had things they wanted to say choreographically, but their tools were really either mixed or limited or adjacent to the way modern dance was taught at the time. So that was just interesting. So trying to come from a pretty rigorous, really repetitive, super clean proscenium stage aesthetic to a group of really unruly people who hadn't spent much time in class dancing but really wanted to dance and had something to say. It was an interesting experience.
And we were very diverse in our backgrounds when we came to each other. Like I had a pretty extreme ballet background, and you had a jazz background. Colleen Halloran, for example, was a theater major, and then she changed to dance. So she didn't have a lot of dance background. And here we all are. We managed to succeed to some degree in our community, and still be different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that's pretty cool. And just thinking about the teaching that was going on when we were students, and maybe you can help me remember, but it was a very eclectic mix of people. So, because we had Tim O'Sleen, and he had danced with the Hawkins Company, and then we had Shirley, and she had studied with Graham, so there was a lot of parts of her class that were rooted in Graham technique. And Judy Makita had danced with Cunningham, so we had that.
The company members and Deb Siegel with composition and.
And then a lot of the people like Jenny Sohn and Paula Fraz and Mary Woolhan, all those people were they were steeped in Shirley's aesthetic. So the technique that they were teaching was
Brian was still here at that time too.
Brian, Jeffrey.
Actually went to high school. Jenny Stone and I went to high school together, danced in high school together. She's still younger than me, but there's pictures of us in our high school yearbook.
Jenny Sohn quickly became my heroine when she did a flat back, and then she rippled through her spine one vertebra at a time back into her flat back, and I went,
Yeah.
that was, and I that was the first time that I took class from her, and I still remember that image
She
to
was
this day.
beautiful.
One vertebra at a time.
She was also a really beautiful example of Shirley's ability to really change and shape and train an articulate body. Because when she started, like if you saw a video of her and what she looked like when she started at the dance center and with Shirley, and where she went in terms of the way her body changed and her ability to articulate her instrument and the work that she did, she was a different person. I think that really spoke to Shirley's ability to train dancers or to provide an environment that allowed for that growth.
Yeah, I did not get that right away. Here's one of my favorite Shirley stories. Finally make it into the Shirley class, right? Because you got to work your way up. I'm no modern, right? So I'm just scrappy.
And that was modern 3, and we only had 3 levels of technique, and there were only 3 classes. There was one at 9, one at 10:30, and one at noon. That was it.
So everybody's in class, and I'm feeling like I'm making it. So everybody gather around, and Shirley says, and look at the difference between this port-de-bras and this port-de-bras. And I was like, and I looked around, and everybody's like, yes, yes, yes. And I was like, I have so much to learn. It took a minute for me to remember the same.
That's hilarious.
Sometimes
Because I
things
was
did
like-
look the same. Though.
I was turning to my peers like, and everybody was like, high
Oh,
five, yes,
definitely,
I
that's
see
right.
it.
Oh, let me-
It's like they're either full of shit or I have a lot to learn.
That's like probably a little both.
Well, I was talking about this with students today. So last week we had a masterclass open to the community. And my students got to be in class with people who came from outside to take class, and they were talking about their experience of that. And I was sharing with them how valuable that was to us as students to have, the people who were dancing at the Chicago Repertory Dance Ensemble and Akasha
That's
and
so good.
Cover Street, and to have all those people in class with us, right? Because then we had something to really aspire to.
I wish it was still, I wish there was a way to find that in some way again, because I feel like, you learn so much. It really is a communal experience taking class, and you're learning from one another. You're dancing with each other. You're borrowing. You're liking something that someone's doing. You're trying it on. And if there's no sort of range of someplace to go within the class, like that was when it got really clear about which level was which and what you had to have before you moved from this level to that level. I feel like that stuff was really lost because I learned so much from the people that not here. I mean, I didn't actually take class here that much because that was all happening elsewhere. But it was so important for me to have people that were way better than me in class with me, doing it more richly, more fully, more musically, more subtly, more to be able to borrow that, try it on, just even see it was so important.
That's been my only experience in class ever.
That was definitely my experience. But sorry, go on.
Well, I just wanted to ask a little more specifically about when you think about Shirley and her legacy, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, the setting of the example of how to run the company and the same example you were speaking with taking class with company members. Once you started taking class in her setting too, Paul Fraz is dancing next to you and she's also your teacher, and how to build that community of teachers and artists all under the same roof and setting is really spectacular. To have a home like that and for us to see that on a daily basis, this is how a company
To be
is
part of it.
run, and to be absorbed in it, it's unique.
Yeah, and I think, I think everybody would say this, but Shirley made us all cry a whole bunch. She made us all cry a whole bunch.
And quit.
And quit and restart and whatever, right? But I think that even though she was hard, she was very intuitive in figuring out how to challenge people. I don't know necessarily that it was always a pleasant experience, but for example, I don't know if you remember this or not, but early in my studies in composition, she made me wear my tennis shoes for the whole semester. Do you remember that? I think it was
Vaguely.
Comp 2. We had to take 4 sections of comp. And she made me wear my tennis shoes for the whole semester because I had all of that ballet training, and she wanted me to figure out how to move differently. And she knew that the tennis shoes would make me do that. And that was a pivotal
That's awesome.
moment for me as a mover and as a person who made movement vocabulary. That was a giant thing. So I think that, wow, she made us cry a lot. That one of those things that she's really good at is being able to zero in on what could challenge somebody to help elevate them to the next level of their artistry, and not being accepting of less than what she thought that thought you could do.
Yeah, really, high level
Yeah.
standards. And also, and in the littlest thing, watching her work with someone, just saying, no, that's not it. No, not yet. That's not good enough. No, more this way. Just like those 2 arms, like this much difference.
Yeah.
Boy, she would work
Yeah.
on that with people for hours. And you can see, I see I never worked with Shirley as a dancer. I watched her very peripherally. I didn't dance with her company. I saw her company work, but I see in the bodies of people who did, I see her. Emma Draves, there was Emma Draves yesterday.
Yeah.
And I see Emma giving some of that stuff to other people now
Yep.
too, and there's a really specific
It's a particular
Yeah.
physicality.
weightedness, groundedness, sense of gaze, 3-dimensionality,
Yeah.
that's really specifically.
And an incredible musicality. That's what I notice when I watch her work, or just about. It's like it's something. There's a few choreographers I can think of who I feel do this, and something about Shirley's work. It sounds so ridiculous because I think I don't know how to describe it well, but it's something about how it truly derives kind of the meaning. I gather meaning from the way that the body. It sounds so dumb the way I'm saying it. It totally prioritizes movement. So it's like the way that the movement emerges in the musicality and the physicality is how the meaning emerges. I guess I think of it as like highly compositional,
Yep.
but not heady. It's a physical, compositional sense. And I feel like the rigor of getting at, that's why, no, it's not here, it's here, is how then the meaning emerges. Without that specificity, it wouldn't emerge in that way.
Well, and she also talked about that in composition, or
Mhm.
she does talk about it in composition still. I mean, what she would encourage us to not be reliant on sound to make a dance work, that the material should be able to be interesting and curious and hold its own without any sound, right? It had to be that detailed and that rich and
The
articulate.
sound had to be in the body.
And if you were going to use a prop, you better investigate that sucker until, like in every possible way. That was a composition assignment. We had to use a prop. That was one that made me cry for sure.
We're like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
She's like, don't use it again.
I think the other thing too, and it's hard to be able to say exactly what the things were that were forward thinking, but I feel like Shirley was forward thinking in the work that was coming to the dance center and the work that she was sharing with the city and the teachers that she was tapping into. We had, there was an African class every Saturday in our space. Darlene Blackburn taught African dance. And Dance Africa started and happened under Shirley's watch with the vision and support of Woody White, who was the executive director of the dance center at that time. And I know from my own experience of being a person in this dance community and being a student and an administrator at the dance center that Dance Africa, it had a really big impact on me just as an artist in terms of opening my eyes to other things that, other kinds of dance and other people. It really helped to kind of blow up the kinds of people that we brought to Chicago and the things that we defined as dance. Like one year we had the international step dance, or not the international, the national step dancing sorority and fraternity step dancing winners from the United States. And so there was a men's group and a women's group, and they performed in Dance Africa, and that was part of, that was so cool and interesting. And that's not something I would have seen or paid attention to if it hadn't been in front of me.
But then there also were those bridges, that's the first time I ever saw urban bushwomen.
Yes.
Who built this beautiful bridge between traditional African dances or some of the other rhythmic forms that became part of that festival, and something that was happening in the modern dance classes in studios.
And also choices like, and I'm not saying Shirley was solely responsible for all of these, but she certainly was a party to it and supporting it and helping to push things. But choices like Garth Fagan's bucket dance being part of Dance Africa. I mean, that was really modern, colored unitards, and we were doing that in the space at the Medina Temple, and
which is now Bloomingdale's.
Well, now it's not even
Beautiful space, incredible space, amazing.
4,000 seats in a half circle with a thrust stage, and there's Garth Fagan's bucket dance. It was so cool. It was so cool. And the women drummers that came, Kothi, that came from Milwaukee and performed. There were lots of things about, and Rennie Harris, the first Rice River Ready coming, and them performing in the Auditorium Theater. And Rennie and I actually had a conversation about this when he was here last time, just about, that was the first time he was having his work in a proscenium space like that, and here, and he was this young guy with these young dancers, and Baba Chuck Davis brought him in, and that was big shit to be in the Auditorium Theater, but it was also fucking scary because, he hadn't had his work produced in that sort of way. And he had to rise, there was a lot he didn't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I learned a lot from Dance Africa. It really broadened my perspective about dance, because I think just my own trajectory as an artist had been very narrow up to that time.
She was a visionary. She really was. So brave. Just thinking of Shirley. Yeah.
And in her own work too, the people that she collaborated with and the ways in which she used the space at the dance center, and her interest in site-specific work and collaborating, with musicians and videographers, and she was collaborating with John Boshi in the 90s.
I remember the people too. I remember because when you're teaching, and then there's a guest teacher, that person teaches your classes, so that was really great for me, because then I was able to get these little bits and pieces of things from all of them. Wally Cardona was in a lot. June Finch was in a lot at that time. Who was the woman from
Loretta Livingston?
Loretta Livingston was in a lot at the time, and Contact Improv.
Chris Aiken?
Chris Aiken was there. So those influences, there was a kind of a wave, I think, of release technique during that period. Kind of emphasis
early
on that.
90s.
And that was really.
Teach here?
I taught here. I was never a full-time faculty, so I was part-time, but I taught here for 20 years. Till Bonnie started.
Huh.
Yeah, and then I think, and then I did a couple little bits and pieces after that.
Sorry.
I was also teaching at Hubbard Street most of the time, and had a company and doing other stuff.
So cool to hear about. I was thinking about Shirley's legacy a little bit, and I came in right after we were in this building, and Bonnie was the chair, so I never kind of worked with, Shirley had already moved on at that point, but one of the things that I just recognize as and appreciate so much is her complete and utter faith in creative process, and how important it was that it was embedded in the curriculum, that every single student
who came through the dance department as a dance major had to, take quite a lot of composition and then produce work on the stage as a culminating experience. Yeah. What?
You go ahead and keep talking. I
Well,
wanna
and
make
so-
Jackie talk about that.
Oh, good, because I want to hear. And so we ended up, I just remember feeling like, and I think just talking about the level of kind of attention to detail and rigor that Shirley brought to creative process in her own work, that I feel like with it I believe too that creative process
Is the place where that integration happens and where you jump to the higher level, kind of where you discover yourself, your own voice, where you become independent in your thinking and perhaps surprise yourself, right, with what you can do. And not everybody wants to go off and be a choreographer, but there's something about that process of having to pull that together, which I find so valuable. We've moved away from that a bit in the department in terms of requiring it of everybody, and I know some people were like, well, some people were making dances they didn't even want to be, then you had to sit and watch them, and I imagine that as the department got larger and there were more students, it was probably harder to also kind of accompany each student through that process, maybe in the way that would have been most beneficial at that scale. At that scale it was hard perhaps. But anyway, it's something I still think about, I kind of long for, or believe that I wish that there was a way we could bring that in, is that each student should go through that process, that the choreographic process, or bringing a creative work to fruition as part of their learning. Yeah, no, so I'm curious what.
Well, we took a lot of comp classes, but I remember the duet that you and Carl did.
Yeah.
And I just, I remember that I was there. Like, I remember the arc that you went on, the journey that you went on as we went through that compositional process. And I just remember how proud I was of you and that work that you did. Because you made this giant jump from one thing to another thing. And I know it wasn't easy to do. And
It's funny, I was thinking about that piece as I was driving here because I was reminiscing about all of the memories. And so I created a duet, actually Earl McComb.
Earl, that's right.
But I had to teach it to Carl Jeffries to go to the
Yes.
College Dance Festival. And it was a piece on rape called He Leave His Mark. And as I was driving here, I was like, oh my God. I was like, 19 years old, and how ballsy of that is me to put myself on stage with, and Earl McComb is big, African American man, big, and he was all in white and I was all in black, and I thought, the freedom to be able to create that at that time, or the stupidity, I'm not sure what. But to create that process raw. Just raw movement before coming. Tim O'Sleen it's Tim O'Sleen that was that turning day in time for me, when people ask you, like, was there one day in your life that, made a shift? And Tim O'Sleen came to my high school and taught a master class, and he said, we're having this high school dance workshop afterwards and I want you to come. And I was like, okay. No plan to go to college, no plan. I danced extensively in high school, but I was going to do hair. I went to cosmetology school. I was going to do hair. And so I was like, but I'm going to keep dancing. I'm going to keep taking class. So I'm going to take this workshop, keep it going. And he created, as he did with every high school workshop, this piece on sports. I can't remember the name of it, but there was one of us on each of the bases, and then somebody was all rolled up in a ball, and the other one hit the ball, and that person went rolling, and then chassé from one to the next. And I was like, yes, this is it. But he also did in that workshop these recipe pieces to get from literal to abstract movement, where we were literally, putting on our aprons and tying it, and then he had to get us to the point, where we put our apron on in a whole other way.
And then I was like, oh, this is inspiring. And so I looked at the class offerings and this. And so my parents had already wrapped their head around that their youngest was not going to college. And so I was like, can I do all this? Can I go to school? And they were like, well, of course. They never had the opportunity to go to college, so fly. And yeah, it was a lot of those ideas compositionally that really brought it from this just raw place where I was creating dances because it felt good, to a place where you're actually speaking at some level. One of the first things that I did as a child was I created a dance with a neighbor to Devil Went Down to Georgia, and knocked on every neighbor's door and made them watch me perform it. So from there to Tim's work and to Shirley's work, a long stretch of really blessings that were given, passed down.
And tying back into some of the other stuff that we said about the curriculum and Shirley, you made this giant jump, and the quality and texture and content of your work blew up, but the thing that was you, so eloquently you, was still there, bubbling up inside of it. Mm-hmm. And how we were able to find that in the curriculum, in our experience in the curriculum.
Right. Yeah, that's truly, as you were mentioning, her talent to seek that out in people, truly, because my voice was not Shirley's voice, and she was so true to what it was that she was saying and doing, but I was always like, okay, I hear you, but that's not my voice, too.
And she heard you say that.
Yeah, and besides it being the jazz idiom, right, besides it just being the genre of dance that I was more comfortable speaking the language of, it was still finding my truth. What's my truth? And so I observed her speaking hers, right? And that's where that starts to culminate. Mm-hmm. So no, I'm not going to say the same things that you're going to say, and I don't believe the same things you do, but I'm watching her walk in her truth. Mm-hmm. And then you follow that, you absorb that. That's a huge gift to pass on. Hopefully somebody else can pass it on too now.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Janae and I were talking a little earlier about the dance presenting series being like the longest continually running presentation of dance in Chicago. Not counting the auditorium because it feels like a different scale, a different different kind of work presented. But so I wonder if you all could think about how you see the Dance Center and the Dance Presenting Series fitting in the larger Chicago landscape.
When you see a different dance company, national, international, every day, or not every day, every weekend for 4 years, it drastically changes your view of what dance is and what art is. It's hugely informative and life transforming. Every weekend we saw a new concert, and then reflected on it deeply too, right? We would have to write papers about what we saw and become more articulate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't, it's because I've been on the inside for so long, it's hard for me to even answer that question. I mean, I don't know how to answer that question. But I do agree that, and that's why it's important to me now to be part of the presenting series, is that I know the value of the power of seeing those companies and that work, and having that experience and the vibrant exchange that happens between having the artist in the space with you and having one just electric moment with them, and how that can really resonate. And
the impact on the community too. I mean, we speak so often from the point of view as dancer, teacher, choreographer, but if you look at all of the work that Chicago has been able to see because of Columbia College, I mean, when we talk about all of these diverse companies from everywhere, it's a special thing that happens because we know at a deep level how the art changes us, right? The epiphanies that happen, the dialogue that happens. the finding of one's soul by being moved from it. We see that, and it's impactful for others who are non-dancers. We
Yeah, there's
forget
something
that.
about this particular series too. It's not a, this Chicago was really so much of what happened in Chicago was sort of this feeling of there's kind of an import mentality about it. But that there were sort of people who thought we should see the better stuff that was from elsewhere. And there's something about the scale of the space and the fact that the people that were coming in were working with students also, and that you were, maybe earlier in the day, you'd been in class on that stage, and then later in the day, there's a company there, and there's an immediacy to it. It's not separated by the proscenium. The technical level of the space and the production quality is really high, but the immediacy of it is different, right in the same space. I think that was a really important thing for me anyway, to see all that work from all different kinds of people, but it was a little bit more part of what was happening here also, as opposed to it being something sort of dropped down as an example. It was more connected.
Yeah.
The fact that your body had been in that very same space was important to me. And yeah, it was great to be able to see so much work over such a long period of time. And you were asking me about performances, and I'm just sort of scanning, there's all these little
I
bits
got
and
some.
pieces.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing too is seeing all those performances over such a long period of time, but also the relationship that the presenting series has had with a big handful of artists over a long period of time. So, and being able, like Urban Bush Women and Margaret Jenkins and Joe Good, being able to watch their work over 35 years and see
them grow,
how it
mature,
grows and
change.
changes, and that's a really satisfying and I think important. I think it's important to the dance community on a national level that those organizations have relationships in Chicago and that they've cultivated them over a long period of time. And so when Joe Good comes, I see there are people in the audience that I see and I'm like, yeah, those are Joe Good people,
Yeah, right.
I think that's a really important and valuable thing the presenting series does for the city, but it also does nationally for the dance community. And maybe it's just not obvious, but it seems important to me.
I think it is.
I think it is really important.
And also just for there to be a place that is just about dance, that's also important.
Yeah.
That's unusual, and it's just and it's specific, and yet it holds so many things. I feel like that's just the existence of it and that naming of it. Dance is one of those. It's like I've had just like a couple of teachers in my life where I felt like someone said to me, "This thing that you're doing is real. This is real," and that made all the difference, right? And I feel like something about the fact that there is this place that is devoted specifically to dance says that same thing to dancers, and it says it to other people.
I think it's true. It makes the space for it to be able to happen. It holds the space. Like the space itself holds the possibility. And without it, that possibility isn't there. It's incredibly powerful.
Well, and in the bigger world, the dance center is like, one of the places where if you can get a gig at the dance center, then that's like an important part of the junket places that you can actually have your work presented. To land in Chicago at the dance center is an important thing.
Yeah.
At least it used to be. I thought.
It is, and Chicago's still looking to do more of that. I've been meeting with different communities and different dance companies about enriching Black dance and on the South Side, and one of the things that continuously comes up as we discuss is there needs to be more hubs of dance like the dance center is, and in various places. Chicago is very segregated, and so how do we bridge that? Because the art bridges that. The art does that, but how do we do that in this city and provide more spaces? So it's a continuous dialogue to recreate or come up with another version of what it is that Columbia's Dance Center is hugely needed here in Chicago.
Yeah, and, well, you should get Shirley to tell you the story of Bill T. Jones, so you have
Oh,
it,
yeah.
it's accurate. But, because I don't know it accurately, I don't think. But I do remember when Muntu performed in the dance center in the late 80s. And that was like, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal.
Yeah.
And Bill T is one of the memorable, obviously the memorable repeat performers and teachers. And to see him working with students and then do a performance in the evening was, and most recent one was a retrospective of of solos, the Bill T, or the duets, solos and duets, wasn't it? The Bill T and Arnie's really early work. They did it, it wasn't that long ago. And also remounted a work using with a lot of students. I'm always really interested too in that. There's, I find as a choreographer, I find reconstructing work just like so awful. I don't want to do it. I never want to do it, right? But when I see people reconstructing historic works and setting it on younger bodies, younger dancers, I mean, that's how dancers learn things, is through their actual embodied experience. And so to take that work all the way in and perform it, I feel like it adds to the collective memory of an understanding of the form in a way that's really important.
Yeah, and that's, you know what, that's another thing that the presenting series did.
Yeah.
And only we would know this because we worked on it, but Phil wrote those grants to the NEA that were the American masterpieces.
Doris Humphrey.
And the works that we got to have reconstructed here that were historic works or works made by other artists reconstructed were those NEA grants, and Phil wrote those grants.
Yeah, those were amazing.
What were the works?
Well,
I think there was a Cunningham
There was a
work,
Cunningham,
there was
Well,
a,
that-
there was that.
Yeah, Paige. Are those the ones that like the
Banu.
Banu was here to set it. Paige has.
they were historic works. Well, I can't, of course I can't think of
Water
them.
dance, that's Doris Humphrey, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did water dance and we did
Seeing that.
shakers. We did. I can't. I have to really get back in my. But there were.
Oh, and the opening here. Remember, there was the what's it called? The mound. There was a bunch of work, Judson Church work that was part of the
Oh,
Banu's first year.
that
I
was
wasn't
Bonnie's.
here, but I heard about it.
The pass forward where
chair
Barishnikov
dance.
opened the.
That's right.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of other amazing work that was from that era.
Yeah,
in
the chair
Yeah.
guy.
And the one that got
Chair guy.
the
David Gordon.
and the work where they're singing Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what's funny is that I remember there were two older white ladies sitting in front of me, and they were here to see Barishnikov, and I was too, of course, but they were really unhappy with the work.
rest of the program.
Yeah, and I just remember thinking, how awesome it was. I mean, he was amazing, and just for us that we got to see that work, and that it was just church work, and that and that he was doing it, and there were community members, and
So having the
Lucinda
stairwells
Child's
and-
exit was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, ever, and it was part of that program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also to that end, we did Dancing in the Streets. Do you remember we did the performances in the State of Illinois building, Ginger? Bless you. And that Elizabeth Streb ringside performed.
Oh, yeah.
And Stephen Koplowitz made a dance for over 100 people. I was in it.
Yeah.
And Shirley did a dance that was performed under the Picasso. And there was something else, I don't remember what it was. And there was a sound installation by Christopher Janney. And we, the 100 dancers, rehearsed after hours in the State of Illinois building. And because, we were up on the balconies and and part of the work, there was text. We said, we want to see the governor. He owes us money, right? And they heard this in the building, and then there was a phone call, and we had to, Stephen Koplowitz had to talk to people from the governor's office. It was a whole big deal. But we did work.
Still true.
I did work. It's funny because Stephen and I were laughing about that last summer at Bates, actually. when we were there. It was funny. Imagine 100 people, right? They were all in white jumpsuits, and we were hanging over the edges of the.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it's funny that it got people stirred up. I like that. Yeah, and actually, I think I might have some. I think he sent me some video snippet or something over the summer.
We have video of that in the
Yeah,
archive.
I can send it
that's
to
funny.
you.
There
It was
was
kind of funny.
There's something else to say. From the archive. I mean, I
say it.
discovered things from the archive, like because we have all this video documentation. Because there was this era in the dance center when there was all of this activity that happened in the community. There were a number of site-specific works. I think that piece or project might have landed on the news, or there was something that was televised. And there was a whole series, I think, that happened at the library that would get videoed.
Oh, yeah, so-
There would be like lecture demonstrations
Yeah.
that would get videoed, and then
They were noontime. That was one of the reasons we used the Harold Washington Library, because they documented the work.
Uh-huh.
And
and it would land on like
And-
cable access television. So there are these 2-camera shoots with, really well done, and
that was part of the programming of the presenting series. There would be lunch, there would be noontime, like mini performances or lecture demonstrations that would happen in the space of the Harold Washington Library.
It's a lovely little space. Have you been there?
I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's really
Very handsome house postage stamp of a stage.
Yeah, it's small.
yeah, and then also there was another site-specific project that I think Mordine and company did with the Liz Lehrman Dance Exchange that also happened in some kind of public site.
It was at the Chicago Historical Society.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't quite remember the location.
Yep,
That also maybe was in the 90s also.
yep, yeah, I remember it too.
And there was just quite a lot of like workshops that happened in the community. So when companies would come into town, at least maybe some of them would do workshops in different parts of the city, and yeah, just the scale of activity is was really striking.
Well, and I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but that's how I learned to have a company. So, and to go into a community was through the model that the dance center had, where we would have a company come in and they would do residency activities, and they would be inside of the dance center and they would be outside of the dance center and with community organizations, so I learned the value of that, and then that by osmosis became part of the way in which I did my own work when I was, doing residencies with my company in different parts of the country. And I would create residencies like that so that I would have an opportunity to be connected to and engaged with a lot of different people. And I learned that from the dance center.
So I'm trying to understand, this is partially selfish too, but like the relationship between the school side and the presenting series side and the dance center. And so like you said, Woody was the executive director of the dance center. And now when I meet people, sometimes they're like, oh, you're the executive director of the dance center. And I'm like, no. I'm the director of the dance presenting series, and the dance presenting series lives at the dance center. But it's also interesting for me to hear like, oh, this residency structure is like been going on a long time with the teaching and the
The other thing, I don't know, tell me what you think, Marty. I feel like when it was at Uptown, everything was a lot blurrier, like the line between things and the the levels of the classes and who was whether you were what department. It was all a little bit more of a big, everything kind of all mixed together.
We were operating pretty independently.
And it was Shirley, right? Shirley was sort of the driving force of making all those things happen. And so if the rules didn't kind of fit for something, you would just like get away with the rules and do it differently so that something could happen, right? I mean, I don't mean to be, it felt like it was really fluid, and there was a driving single visionary force who was making a lot of stuff happen, right?
Yeah.
And so if the company was in residence there, that's really different. Shirley's company was in residence in the school, for a long time, and so it really was sort of led by her.
We'd have to go back and look at some, I might be talking out of turn. I mean, we would have to go back and look at some grants and things like that, It was pretty autonomous though. I mean, Shirley was the chair, she ran the dance department. department. She was the person in charge.
Yeah.
And the person who curated the presenting series worked with her and for her.
It
She
felt
was
more
in
like
charge.
an artistic director model of
Yeah.
where the artistic
she was the
director,
artistic director.
and she
Yeah.
was the artistic director.
And there was a time where we had a person who managed the presenting series, a director, and then there was an associate director, and then there was somebody who did marketing.
There's Julie Simpson,
Julie was the executive director.
and that was after Woody.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd have to root around and we could probably, in some old grant applications, we could probably get a better sense of the organizational structure. I remember kind of blurry too, because I was a student, so.
And I was coming out of a completely different environment
But
when I
Shirley
came
was-
to school, because I hadn't worked
She
in
was
academic
chief in
environment.
charge.
She definitely was.
She was the lady in
It
charge.
was her house. It was her house. It was a separate building in a separate area of the city. It was its
Yeah.
own whole
Yep.
world.
And the guy who was not the president of the college, but one of the big players, Bert Gall, was, he let her pretty much do what she wanted. He supported her. I mean, he supported her vision and her interests and helped keep things, going.
Okay, so who do you think decided let's move downtown, let's get a new building?
Well, there were a lot of issues with that other building. There were problems with it. Not for one thing, it was separated from the rest of the campus. You know the college history more than, but from the just the presenting side, it was a crime-ridden area.
Yeah.
People's cars got broken into all the time when they were across the
Yeah.
street from the parking lot was there. I think it became too expensive to maintain it. I don't really even know why the
Yeah.
move happened to down here.
There were
but-
some real issues with safety in the neighborhood. It was also around the time we moved is when they started to dismantle Cabrini Green, and the gang lines changed, and the dance center was right at a gang line. So and it shifted closer.
Mhm.
So there were some drive-by shootings. There were some shootings that happened in the neighborhood, and there were also, I remember being inside the dance center with the doors closed and seeing some guys with guns walk down Sheridan Road.
We parked close, yeah. I remember the first day that I drove up to the dance center, this is my very first class in Uptown, and I'm gonna get there early and I'm gonna warm up, I'm gonna be ready for that 9 o'clock class, and the door was inset, so there's the brick facade and then the door was inset, and there's a man sitting in there.
Yeah.
What is he doing? So I'm gonna wait for him to leave, and I walked over and I was like, oh, he's using the bathroom, so I'm just gonna step right in and take my first class. And then it never really, us
Uptown,
being there never, right, we stayed within there was like the little J.J. Pepper's convenience store there, but outside of, crossing the street to go there, you stayed pretty tight.
So I think, and Bonnie could probably actually really talk more about this, because she came in right as, and I'm sure helped.
Just new space,
Yeah. And I don't know the details of all of it,
She
but
came in when y'all were still up north.
because she curated the season that opened the dance center.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
And I remember some there was some thing with the
And
facade of the building.
She's called an old, big, drafty building with it.
Yeah, and every once in a while there'd be pieces of the ceiling that would fall.
And there wasn't really good. It wasn't really enough office space. There was no dressing room space.
Yeah.
There was no, even more than here, there was no lobby
Yeah.
separation for patrons, and it was
And
all.
the college was growing at that point, and I think that, it made sense
I can't
to.
imagine they didn't want to take it down. Like,
But when we
cost of
came
the
down here,
college
there was
itself.
nothing. There was nothing.
Right.
There was nothing. There was parking lots
Right.
everywhere. I mean, parking was plentiful. There was no grocery store. There were no restaurants. There was nothing. It was like being in the desert.
Yeah. The first concert I came to, my mom and I we're like, oh, let's have dinner and see the show. And I was like, there's nowhere to have dinner.
Yeah. And furthermore, when we were students at Columbia in the late 80s and the early 90s, you didn't go past 11th Street.
That's
And
true.
that's where the theater building was,
Right.
right? And I had a friend who lived Colleen and I had a friend who lived at 1212 South Michigan right here. And I remember you know, us coming down the street to go, I mean, it was scary. It was, it was a time. But yeah, you didn't go south.
No.
This whole, it's city development's really changed this.
Yeah.
So
And
I
then
think,
this is part of it, right? So it is artists and educators, and that's what often shifts it.
Right.
yeah, so I think there were a lot of factors. I think Bonnie could probably answer that question more comprehensively.
Yeah, but I'm interested in what you all have to say.
And then it really did, a lot of things changed, but partly because of the physical building, then rethinking how the dance series was related to the school. I mean, that goes through, it seems like it goes through its tides, and I'm very much not on the inside of that dialogue, but it seems like it goes through its, its ebbs and flows about how integrated and how separated those two pieces are. I can't.
How did this building feel different? Like in the first couple years?
That's
kind of when I stopped teaching.
It's new, so it felt sterile. There was so much character and history in the old building, and so despite the neighborhood, for me, like, and maybe it's just because I completed all of my education there, and so it was all of the creative residue was left inside that brick and mortar, and so creativity spurs creativity, and you wanted to be there, and so it felt different. But I didn't take class, I didn't study here, and so then upon coming back for the company performed here in Dance USA and whatever other events that I've come in and been a participant in, it felt different, but it's like, your childhood home growing up. There's always those memories of that house in comparison to something else.
Yeah, I had a lifetime, like the whole first part of my lifetime as an artist in this community was spent in that building.
And
that
we were there
neighborhood.
all day. We were there, we would come to take the 9 o'clock class, and then you would have to stay to do your teching and your shows after it was 11 o'clock when you left.
I was on the tech crew.
Oh my God.
And that was before there were, again, talking about rules, right? There were no rules.
No.
We did tech until we were done.
Yeah, that's right.
And then and then at 9 o'clock,
We were in
you had class with Anna Paskevska. I mean, they're fucking be there, right? So, yeah, there was no rules.
And
we'd be there until late into
pushed
the night
each
doing
other
stuff.
on that big old, be all rickety. I'd be
Yeah.
like trying to scaffold. I didn't want to let go with the one hand. I'd be trying to take that gobo out.
Yeah, we didn't have a cherry picker. We just had a scaffolding. that
And we
got
pushed
put
each
together.
other on it. So when they would get the first start going, you would.
And we moved it through the space.
I decided quick that was not going to be my second job.
Yeah. Colleen and I did that. I learned a lot. And I got to see everything, quadruple times.
Yeah, a lot about what I didn't want to do.
Well, that's learning. Learning what you don't want to do.
That's
is
How
good
many
learning.
students were there at that time?
Gosh,
I
I
don't
don't know.
remember.
I think that, I think our class was a bigger class, and for some reason I feel like we had 12 or 15 people in our class. And I remember Richard Woodbury saying that was a really big, like historically one of the biggest classes they had, but you have to remember it was like 1990, so.
Yeah, well, and back then too, we had emphasis, you could choose an emphasis, right? I could choose choreography as the emphasis or teaching, and now we have BFAs and all, so it was raw then, and so you just sort of selected a track that you wanted to follow.
Yeah, so that was that was right the period of time where they were reorienting the credit hours thing so that it would work for dancers, so that you could actually take enough classes to be able to be a dancer. Like it was a big
Because
shift
the
again,
technique classes
again.
were 3 credits.
Yes.
And so you'd get to your junior year and you'd max out, and then you couldn't take any more technique because you were trying to take all your other classes.
Right.
And that was one of the reasons why they.
Turn to one.
So then you can take
Interesting.
Yeah, then you could take more. Then you could be rigorous about your technical training.
Yeah.
That
So
was.
then would people just take them as community classes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, which was fantastic. I mean, that's like how I met Earl McComb. So he just came in as a community member wanting to dance, and he lived close by, and
you would come in to take class, and if the class was not full, then you could pay and take class.
Yeah.
And often it wasn't full.
I have to tell I made a giant leap forward on Friday.
You did? Okay, please report after this is over.
It's gonna happen again.
That would be.
What,
When
Jane?
when the companies would come into town and do master classes, would community members also?
Yeah.
Were they all mixed together?
Yes. It was fantastic.
I know,
Yeah.
and it was like that in this building for the
A
first.
little while, and then the department got really big.
It got really big,
Right.
and we didn't have space for anybody anymore.
But then they wouldn't let us restart it after a while.
But
So
now
we've
they
been
really
trying, but
want
now, okay.
Part of the reason why we couldn't do it is because at a
Suddenly there
certain
was a
point, we
liability
lost our
issue.
receptionist, remember? So we had nobody who could
Could
answer
take
the
money, gather
phone,
money,
nobody who
or
could take
sign
anything,
waivers.
right, gone.
Something.
I guess I was just curious because when someone was talking about the experience of, maybe it was you, Ginger, of like companies coming in, like the sort of fourth wall or sort of formality of everything was ruptured. It wasn't just the students that were having that experience.
That's right.
It was also the community too. So even people who didn't necessarily go to Columbia that
That's
happened to be in class, there was sort of a more fluid.
Well, we also had, the Dance Center had a community culture council, which was a governing body of sorts that helped organize the residency activities that happened in the community. And it was a really important component of Dance Africa. And it was a way that we developed and maintained relationships with community-based organizations. So like we were talking about Kuumba Links the other day. Kuumba Links has been around for a long time. That was a relationship that got developed in Dance Africa in the early years. And then Julie came down to the CCAP office, or the OCAP office. She and I came there, so that relationship came, and that's why Kelsa was saying, oh, they had a relationship with the CCAP office, but then when that got taken out, then they were kind of left holding the bag. So that's just an example of the relationships that we had with the community and the planning that was happening with the residency activities. So the Community Culture Council would sit, we'd sit at the table and they would help. And there was a person who was the wrangler for them, the community, person. And they helped plan the residencies.
Lisa, I'm curious about your entry into this world. What was it like when you first got here? Or some of your first memories of starting here?
Oh boy.
What was the first concert you saw?
Gosh, I was trying to remember what the first concert I saw was. But what I remember more, which is my first time performing on the stage.
Tell it.
But no, I really do want to remember. I feel like my first concert was like might have been Bill T or Trisha Brown. That was very early when I first got here. One of them, and I was anyway. But yeah, no, my first performance was an improvisation with Daryl and Angie, because I had just come in as a sabbatical replacement for Angie Hauser, who was here. And then she came back and we did this performance, and we had rented these chandeliers that like hovered.
Oh, yeah.
And rugs everywhere.
Yeah, I remember.
But I remember, and I guess what I remember is we had been dancing together and rehearsing, and it was improvisation, but we had been really meeting working really hard, and then suddenly it was time to perform, and it was like, where are they? Like, the space was so enormous. We put so much time into like designing the space and the rugs and rehearsing in 210 for this teeny little space, and then designing what the space was going to be like, and then rehearsing in 210, and then suddenly we were in this huge space and I couldn't see them. I was like, where are they? But in terms of what it was like when I first got here, gosh, I feel like it was deeply established here at the Dance Center. Like it had, and Bonnie was deeply seated in her position. So I feel like, again, it's really fun to hear about all of these early memories because I think there is some sense of like honoring the past. It was always spoken of with a sense of like deep respect for what had come before, but then there was also a sense of like, don't talk about that too much because we moved on.
Interesting.
Yeah, so what year did Bonnie come? Is it 01?
Yes,
Around
01.
there, yeah.
Yeah, and then right after that, it's like right around the time when the dance initiative was happening, when
Yeah.
CDF began.
There was
So
a lot of
there was
stuff.
also what I remember in this building almost more than although I took classes here and I taught classes here and I said a couple of works I think in that first couple of years it was here, but I remember like walking Julia Rhodes' baby in the hall so that she could be involved in a roundtable meeting,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep,
We would have round with the Chicago Dance Record Forum
Yeah.
roundtables meetings would happen here.
Yeah, there was a
Pretty
lot of
frequently.
stuff, a lot of the stuff that was made reference to yesterday, that's, the Community Trust Initiative, there was a lot of dance stuff going on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it felt a little chilly, and the proportions of the stage space felt like, in some ways, it was a really nicely equipped facility, but there's something about that vastness of the
Yeah.
previous space that was kind of like, I missed it,
Like the vastness of the audience space.
No, the opposite, the stage space itself was so much vaster, deeper, it was much deeper, and it had this like ancient wall at the back of it that had kind of a couple of steps going up to a framed staircase that was on the stage right.
Yeah,
so
that's
you
where
could
the
back-
organ was, because it was an old movie house, and so the organ was up in that.
But it was just it was enormous. It was an enormous space, and so the audience was sort of floating in the space, and it didn't have as much of a sort of a fixed theater sitting in it, and it's slightly more could be more distant from the bottom line of the
Yeah,
stage,
it
so that
was.
you had a gaze that was more like deep that way, and as opposed to kind of side for side like it is here. So I still miss that when I see performances here, even though this is a lovely space.
I think that's why the best place is, yes, it was on the stairs.
Yeah.
It was my favorite. Yeah. I was just thinking that, just all of the performance life I had in the old building, but one of the coolest things that I got to do in this building was from the Horse's Mouth project that we brought to the community, and was it working? I think I was just teaching during that time. I don't think I was doing any administrative work. But I got to dance with Gus Giordano. And there were like these little stations on the stage, and you told a story, and then you moved to the next station, and everybody rotated. And when you got to the last station, you did an improvisation with the person who was ahead of you. And I got to improvise with Gus Giordano. And it was so cool. And he was so sweet.
He was sweet.
He was such a sweet man. That was pretty neato.
My only performance experience, I did some performances when I was teaching there, but Hubbard Street danced there at the old space. Before there was a Marley, there was no Marley, it was a varnished plywood.
Yeah.
And we were dancing with, the old-fashioned canvas jazz shoes with the rubber soles, right, those, or in ballet shoes, I think, but I remember just having, such a difficult, it was a dramatic issue with the surface of the floor, and this was a period where you would paint, if it was too slick, you would paint it with Coke.
Yep.
Right, so that was going on, that's when we did I can't remember what all pieces we did there. I know we did the 40s there, which wouldn't have mattered as much in the 40s, so we certainly did something else. We must have been doing Line Drive or some other early work there, but I remember it just being a serious drama.
Yeah, no, there was a tap company that came, it'll come to me in a minute what it was called. And we had a drama with them. I was on the tech crew, and we had to take up, they couldn't dance on the Marley, and then so we had to take up the Marley, and then the hardwood floor was underneath, and there was stuff all over it, and nicks, and Colleen and I did this, and we had to clean the floor, and we had to put tape on things, and we had to do a lot of work, and that was 2:00 in the morning. And then, And then they did the whole thing with the Coke. It was very dramatic.
Yeah.
And then I think in the end, we had actually ended up maybe putting the Marley back on the floor because it just didn't work. Yeah, it was very traumatic.
Another
I'll
thing
think
I
of who it
remember seeing
was.
here, I was thinking that one of like a really powerful performance. What was the name of the company from Mali?
No.
Malawi.
Oh, Jazz Ensemble. Maybe it was.
What? Oh, you're thinking of the tap. What was
Yeah, I think it was.
Jazz Tap Ensemble.
Yeah, it was. It was the Jazz Tap Ensemble.
Said the
Do you
tapper
remember
behind
the company
camera.
from Malawi that did that? It was really almost like an actual coming of age ritual, the work that was happening.
How long
It was
ago?
so powerful.
In this
It was in
building?
this building, it was early, must have been in the early 2000s. I will never forget that work. I can't remember, of course, the name of the company, but that was something else.
Was it Germaine Agogni? I don't think I'm saying it right, but
I'm not sure. From Malawi, that's what I remember. I remember that.
I have
My
to
friend
look.
was just sending her son, who was gonna spend a year in Malawi, and I had never even had an idea of where that was at all, so those two things are
Yeah.
stuck together.
I have to look at the list.
But it was really, it was deeply spiritual, deeply ritualistic, and it was as though we were just allowed to witness it. It really was, it was powerful.
I saw David Parsons do Caught
Yeah.
in the old dance center, and who knew that dance would still be happening now, all this time.
I was just in New York and saw it.
It's so
And I saw
great.
it here for the first time. Yeah.
Remember it? Do you
And the
remember?
woman who I saw David Parsons
Yeah.
do it here.
Yeah.
But the woman who's dancing it, and they all know it, but the woman who danced it from his company in New York, and I just saw it this summer.
Oh, God.
Beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
Beautiful. I remember when they did that. Stunning.
And I remember seeing D-Man in the Waters, and this is when Larry Goldhuber was dancing with Bill T. And that was the first time I had ever seen a person of large stature perform.
Oh, he was so beautiful.
Wasn't he
I remember
fabulous?
I remember there was some work where he was like on his toes, crossing from stage left to stage right. There were those light bulbs above his head, like as he was sort of sleepwalking and touching these lights. But so beautiful, so light.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was beautiful.
That was a good dance.
Yeah.
Also Wendy Perrin. We had her a million years ago, and she did a dance that actually had pigeons. And they brought the pigeons with them. I worked tech for this one too. And we had to put up like a net, kind of, that went across the front of the space. So there was no grand curtain or anything. It's like what we have here. So that the pigeons could fly around inside of the, that was a thing.
Oh yeah, I remember I did other dances. I danced more I danced in Robin Lake's work stand.
Yeah, I know, I did
Dance Center
too.
a lot. We did a whole, she did a work that she showed first, I saw first at Moming, and then later danced in, it was an evening length work about the Holocaust.
Yes.
That was intense, really interesting to work on, intense to work on. We danced that at the dance center. And then she did an evening length work about food,
Yep.
which was one of my favorite things ever to
Yeah.
perform. I loved doing that dance with Jeff Carpenter, who
Uh-huh.
sadly is no longer
Yeah.
with us. But he was a Shirley dancer.
Yeah.
And then did freelance.
And Robin Lakes was a graduate of the dance program. She was
Yeah, and then she
us.
went on to faculty at Northwestern, and now she's in
Texas. Yeah.
But she was a good student of Daniel Nagrin's, and so that was like a totally different way of working from where I was coming from. It was not about anatomy or that kind of physical technique really at all. It was all sort of image based. Like every movement was a thought, an idea, and you had to figure out how to make it connect somehow.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I danced at her work too.
Well, go ahead. No, you go. No, I'm just so always when Momaine comes up.
Oh yeah.
I'm always like, yeah, because it was so before I got here, but it's always spoken of as like this magical place, and so I was wondering about that, and then because we're talking about the dance center, if there was a connection between Momaine and the early dance center.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I knew about Moming when I was a student. In fact, I remember when they were trying to rescue it, and we had this big, campaign here in the community where we tried to raise the money to save the building because it was going to be sold to be condos. And we just couldn't raise the money that it needed. But it was kind of like a Trader Joe's in the sense that it was between Whole Foods and Jewel and Aldi. Like it was like, this kind of weird enigma in the middle. Lynx was that little bitty,
Right.
our little space, and that was kind of the entryway into the community.
Yeah.
I did my first concert, produced my first work there. And Moming was sort of in between
It was
Lynx and the dance center. Like the
and
Trader
all of that
Joe's.
for me, because I was dancing with Hubbard Street at the time, and all of that to me was sort of like over there.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, totally.
And except that I was interested. I made forays out. I liked to take class above the Biograph when Nana was
Nana
had
was
her
teaching,
space there, and Warren Conover, who was leaving American Ballet Theater, would come in the summers to stay with Fred Alex and his boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
And he would come and he'd teach. And here's this gloriously beautiful American Ballet Theater soloist teaching all the schlumps and all the mismatches and all the Poonie Dodson was in that class and Mary Ward and all different kinds of people. And so that was a place where sort of there was a mashup of the Lynx Hall Dance Center, Moming.
Yeah, it was a place.
folks.
It was a place to take class, and it was a place to self-produce work.
Moming was not the space above the Biograph.
Moming, yeah, and it was also it did a little bit of presenting, and I think it was a little bit more avant-garde, and then
But Bill T was there early. Bill T and Arnie were there
early.
early.
Yeah.
So was Aiko and Coma
Yeah.
early. They came regularly there. Robin produced a lot of work there.
Yeah.
I didn't see tons of stuff there, but I also, and then there were other people that were housed there, like
Yes.
Akasha did rehearse there regularly. I set some work on them. There were also, they had a gallery space, and it was a big old rangy building. Michael Zarang, I think, lived there, actually literally lived there for a while when he was in late teenagers, and he's really reminiscent about that space. So there, a lot of the same players that were kind of working in other places were there, but and that was David White, right?
Mhm.
That would right? Am I right?
And Julie Simpson
from-
lived there too.
And Julie Simpson was involved there. Yeah.
David White from Dance Theater Workshop?
No,
I
not
can't
that
remember.
David White. Do I have the wrong name? What's his name?
David.
That was at Moming. It's in the archive. I know.
Let's think about it. It'll come to us.
Yeah.
I
One
know
of the-
you know.
David L.
It'll come to us.
What's up?
Please don't record this for posterity.
Right.
It's wrong.
His name was
Okay.
David.
It was way back
One of
when.
Yeah.
One of the
I can't
founders.
Him and Jackie Radis was
And
there.
Jackie Radis.
So that was a whole.
So it was kind of like it was a place, it was a kind of a community hub in the sense that you could take class there and you could produce work there.
And it was also massive. It had a huge kind of cathedral, big church. It
Yeah.
was a church.
Yeah.
So it had a massive space that had a little stage at the end of it, and the massive space was part of what would have been a large hall, and the audience was just sort of, so also really big, really high ceilings, and,
A history.
I did my first professional performance there. I performed in Lori Macklin's work.
Oh, yeah.
And I met Lori when she set a work on the student choreographic workshop. That was how I made that connection. And I got paid $150.
Wow,
I know.
that's pretty good.
I know, it was good, wasn't it?
So I just wanted to see if Janae or Jane had any questions before we kind of do closing thoughts.
Can I ask another question about like early Chicago or different era Chicago history with Moming? Because I also have come into the community and had sort of like mythic status. Was there a relationship between Moming and the Randolph Street galleries?
Well, I don't
Or
know.
not
I don't know.
necessarily, it was just like
You
another.
have to ask
point.
Peter. Ask Peter
I don't
Taub. I
know.
don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I was versed in mine.
It just seems like Moming was
World.
similar to Lynx where it like had overlapping communities. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't just dance, or there was sort of more, like mixing or something. Maybe
Yeah, well,
because of the size of
That
the-
makes me think the Dance Center presented Goat Island in really early early in the Goat Island times, we did it in a church that was around, I think it might have been in Boys Town.
Oh, I know the church, yes, it was
Yeah.
for the Congregational Church on
Yeah,
West
yeah,
Belmont.
yeah.
Belmont just
And that was
west of
wild and
Sheridan.
crazy, and Brian Sainer was in it.
Yeah, they rehearsed there for a long time,
Yeah.
and long after that.
Yeah. That was a dance center presentation. Janae.
I have two. And maybe one can just be a roll call, but there's a lot of folks who are no longer with us that otherwise would be in this room perhaps, and I just wondered if we could give them a shout out.
Tim O'Sleen, Jeff
Tim
Carpenter.
O'Sleen, Jeff
Tim
Carpenter.
The person whose name I was not remembering correctly, right, who ran Momaine. Who died of AIDS.
Yeah, we lost a lot of people in the community to the AIDS epidemic. Yeah. I remember the first person that I remember dying from AIDS was Kenny Comstock.
Oh, yeah.
And he was this beautiful, do you remember it? This is how I remember it. He was this beautiful dancer in our community, and he went to dance on a cruise ship, remember? And then he came back and he was suddenly sick, and 4 days later he was gone. And he was in his 20s. And that happened a lot. Tim didn't go until later. In the 94. He died while I was at graduate school.
Yeah. And then Brian left town.
And Poonie Dodson.
Poonie.
And
Poonie Dodson was really ensconced at Momaine.
yeah.
But there was is it Jeff Early? The scholarship that was set up at Lynx for some time was based on the funds that were raised because of when Poonie died.
Oh.
Is that where Poonie's Cabaret is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Poonie Dodson. He was a
never knew that.
super tall African American guy, so.
Yeah. I just
He was
barely remember
fantastic.
it. Yeah.
I remember watching him at Momaine do a work where he wearing a tiny diaper, was walking across there were glass bottles. I think there was a light in the glass, but him just crossing the stage, this beautiful regal queen, super long, thin black body walking across these glass. Across. It was great.
I can't remember if Poonie went to Columbia or not.
No.
Can't remember if he did. He might have. I'm sure there's lots. I can't think of off the top. I'm sure there's lots of people.
What do you think people today, or Columbia students today, would be surprised to hear about the Dance Center and its history?
I don't know enough about who they are, who the student body is now here.
I think, one of the things that's always struck me is just the way that the community is connected, the lineages of the people and the way they were kind of operating in the community and how people intersected. Like Joel and Nana and
Right.
Shirley, right? But then there were these things, there's places where people crossed over even though there were these sort of powerful forces leading things in particular places in the city, and maybe the aesthetic wasn't the same, but I don't know. The thing that strikes me is the rich history in the dance community and those little tiny links of places.
I remember choosing to enroll and thinking, it was valuable that they were working in the community. And I didn't know why that seemed like it should be valuable to me, because I had no idea what I was going to do with this degree in this path. But the connections made through the center and through the Chicago community are deep threads for me. A lot of connections and a lot of enrichment in my career and in my path that have truly been huge guides. And I think that probably that statement of, hey, one of the perks that we offer you here at Columbia College is that all of our artists are working out in the field. And I was like, seems like it might be important. I don't know.
You reminded me too of.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, no, you're listening to is making me think about, I think sometimes a student, it's hard when you're a student and you're so like absorbed in your learning, and it's hard to remember that it's not just all about you. And I'm thinking about the kind of the pioneers of dance in this city, and just even talking about, you know, some of them today. First of all, they were so brave to like come, they came in with you know, idea. Shirley coming into academia as a woman at that time, and say, you know, this is my vision, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to talk to you and let you, you know, and you're going to fund it.
I'm going to speak with you
She
about
was
your
on it.
interest in modern dance.
Yeah, then I'll think exactly. But at the same time, it wasn't just all about them. Like, they were connecting into community, and what you were talking, like bringing community into the vision. It was about making connections, courageously making connections. And I think the students now, in terms of being surprised, would be able to kind of imagine that yet.
There also was a really, I have to say, I think there was a really strong aura of scarcity, you know, in addition to that happening, I think there also was a feeling of like, there's only so much available to help us all. I'm not going to, you know, there was definitely a lot of sort of scarcity mode in terms of fundraising and funding and resources and stuff like that was a part of it also.
Yeah.
And I think it's
Jobs.
better than it was.
And I think the thing that they would be more surprised about, I got my first job. My first job came from a connection with a person who was a part-time faculty member, and who I had, you know, as a student, managed to impress somehow. And she had the wherewithal to say, I know somebody who can do this, and you should hire her.
Who was it?
It was Paula Fraz.
Yeah, and I have the same. I live next door to Deb Siegel, and after graduating, she was like, oh, there's this posting, but you have to have a bachelor's, so they're posting it at Columbia, but nobody there has a bachelor's yet. And so it was at Maine South High School, and I went and I started teaching their after-school dance program, and the department chair said, I love you, go back and get your teacher certification, write the curriculum, develop the program, and 28 years later, I'm leaving there. Yeah, so I go on sabbatical at semester, but up until that point, and that came through Deb Siegel. Hey Jay, you know, they're mowing their lawn, and I'm, hey Deb, there's a posting, go check it out.
Yeah.
And that's how that, 28 years later, that's how that job turned out for me.
Yeah, and I'm not sure sometimes that the students recognize the gravity of the faculty that we have and the work that they do, that we do in the community. So I don't know. I think that might be surprising to them. I got my first real job because of the recommendation of a part-time faculty member.
I mean, I can speak to my own surprise, which is like after talking with Shirley for the first time, and this kind of goes back to the space for dance too. I think at different points in my life, I felt like, oh, let's be multidisciplinary, you know, and like feeling down on dance. And now I feel like, so I had this meeting with Shirley, and I came out just feeling like it's a miracle anytime any dance organization survives after like 5 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
5 years. And then like each accumulation, each milestone is another miracle, you know? And so I feel like I feel more protective and more aware of the fragility now, and that's surprising to me, that evolution. But I feel like I just feel like we're surrounded by these miraculous things, you know.
I was thinking of an answer because I remember actually we had a student probably a few years ago now that graduated, and she ended up in Las Vegas. And I was surprised because I didn't necessarily think like our faculty have connections. But she was kind of writing this long thing on Facebook that was just sort of this surprise. Like I think she was I'm guessing, I'm not positive, that she might have been from Chicago, and then she came to school here, and she like loved her professors and thought we were all wonderful, but just knew them within this context and just didn't realize the like degree of like the web that goes out like nationally and internationally. And I know before I moved to Chicago, the only two dance venues I knew of in Chicago were Lynx Hall and the Dance Center. Like I knew of the Dance Center before I knew Columbia College Chicago. And I think people locally, or certainly not the college, always realize the like, at least within our field, like the scope of the venue and that it has this long history. Yeah. So I think that would surprise students, and I don't think they really realize that.
How does that, I mean, how does that work here? Like, I know just because I have children who've been through college that there's a point where then there's some coaching and talking about how to think about putting yourself out in the world and your professional development from there. How does that happen here? Because it feels like that's a thing that someone should know about, is that like this is a clan that is spread all over, and we're related in really different ways. Like Margie and I have really different histories, but we also had so much connection, right? And that's true with me. I feel like with almost everybody in the field of dance. There's we know one another in this really specific way because we all share this very special thing.
I mean, I think it was more she knew that it happened locally. She just didn't realize that people in Nevada would know our faculty and that our faculty were nationally recognized.
I see.
Do you know what I mean? Like she didn't understand how far it spread.
Yeah.
Only when you see it firsthand. I mean, Margie and I have been to Bates several times together, and there is a string drawn from each person at the festival where you know them all from somewhere. They are going to enter your path at some point in time down the line, or it runs deep. And so until you're actually sitting in a room where you're like, wait, I know her too, we were roommates, and we, until you're experiencing that, until you're traveling a little. Or each new dancer that comes into the company, I know somebody that they know and have worked with, and
Yeah, it's also got to a point now where I have students where I'm like, oh yeah, I trained your teacher.
Yeah.
I trained your teacher.
That's great.
Any last reflections or stuff that's stirred that you would feel sad if you went to bed tonight? I'm sure there's lots of takes.
My experience, because I came from Hubbard Street, right, from a decade of dancing in a company that was outside of academia, is that this was my introduction to seeing how dance worked inside an academic institution. I'd never really thought of doing that. I'd never really looked at it that way, and so that was just a kind of and like hearing some of the things you're talking about these partnerships and these ways that other departments are working, I wasn't really aware of most of that happening because I didn't really fully understand how academia worked. But I still don't.
Yeah.
Be glad about it.
Imparting thought for me, and I touched on it before, but Tim O'Sleen was that pivotal moment for me, and I still use his phrases that he taught me in class. My favorite one, and you might need to edit this one, but he would always say, pull them by the short and curlies, because we evolved and then we stop evolving. He'd say, pull them by the short and curlies. I have to use that in my classes still today. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, no, he definitely had in it. Yeah.
Huge for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the college dance festival too. He was the sponsor that took us at that time, and we danced to In Excess together.
I think this is a little bit, Chindra, you were talking about this, but I think, as a faculty member here, and so I'm surrounded by the dance center, and the presenting season, I feel like apart from the amazing opportunity of seeing these national and international artists come to the space, and I get to be moved by this art making, I feel like
because I was thinking about, oh, what are the memories that really stick with me about the presenting series? You know, I was thinking, and like I said, I have these little things that are peppered, and I've gotten to see so much, and I'm so grateful, and I've seen many moving things. But the thing that really I think sticks with me most is I feel like it's in that space that I find the community. Like it brings the community together. Of the dance center, of the students. It's where I see the students that I don't have in my classes. Hey, how are you? It's where I get to see people from the community that I don't see all the time. Oh my God, oh yeah, what are you working on? And And so it just, and then people from, you know, from the larger community, the patrons who are not making art, but they're coming to appreciate it and be moved by it. And so again, it's this thing about the space brings people and creates community.
And the multiplicity of the space, like the ability, just from my own experience, the ability to be a teacher in the space, and the ability to be a performer in the space, and the ability to bring and support work being presented in the space. So the multiplicity of the space, the value of that, and the diversity of it feels relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, did you see so-and-so last weekend? That's what I was trying to tell you in class. Okay, were you watching? Like, just again, making those on multiple levels, getting to make those connections. That's really amazing.
Yeah, I had a student last week who, after seeing FRAT, she was like, it all makes sense.
I get it.
Right? And I'm like, yay.
I had a great experience walking out of that concert behind a group of students that were going back to their dorm or something, and one girl was saying, and then when she did that solo, she said, she taught that to me. I can do that. I did that. She taught that to me. She said it about 14 times in a row. It's like really powerful for her to know the thing was in her body, and then she saw that person do it in this, masterful way, but also really generous way of giving it to her.
The advanced level students were talking about that too. Having learned, a phrase in class and then seeing it embedded in the work, how it turned on its head in the work. They were excited about that. And that they could, it's like watching a TV show and recognizing your neighborhood, right? It's because it got shot in your neighborhood. So, I'm full of analogies tonight. Sorry.
I like left hanging, holding the bag. You said that at some point.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your memories and your stories and reflections.